Thank you, Dr. Gilpin. Good morning, everyone. Good to come back and discuss a topic that is very close to my heart, that I deal with on a daily basis in my work in Addis Ababa and with the African Union. I would like to start by saying, I'm going to start quickly with a brief introduction of the topic, Africa's international security relationship, which for me is characterized over the past, since the 90s, by an increased interest of external actors, not only in the economic field, but increasingly in the peace and security landscape. And that is since the 90s. I think that's the very first idea that I would like to point out. The second one is several factors explain this. And the first one for me is the interconnectedness of security threats and their nature. And I know you have gone through the entire security landscape, analyzing the security landscape in Africa, but I think it is important to come back to that, just to give you few dimensions of why this increased interest for Africa today. Interconnectedness of the threats, our level of preparedness. When I say level of preparedness in dealing with these challenges, because we are interconnected and we always have this question mark, asking ourselves if we are ready, really ready, in terms of our capacity, in terms of our thinking, in terms of our relationship and our networking to deal with these threats. Third, share responsibility. Global security, for me, is about share responsibility. Africa has its own share in dealing with global security. And that, for me, is the third dimension that I would like to introduce to you. This three dimension leads to, I cannot see from where I am, it's pity, because I wanted to be able to stand there, but without a microphone. Do we have a microphone? No? Okay. Okay. These three dimensions link to what I call unparalleled interdependencies. Interdependencies in the definition of Africa's relationship, security relationship. Remember, I mentioned interconnectedness. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. So, unparalleled interdependencies in the definition of Africa's relationship, which is linked to the three dimensions that I just mentioned, mainly the interconnectedness of security threats. This also, interdependencies and interconnectedness lead to what I call today the complex relationship, which can be summarized into two words: the visible back and forth between dependency and vulnerability from an African perspective, Africa vis-a-vis the external actors, and what I call self-reliance. Today, Africa is looking for more and more homegrown solutions, and Africa's desires to have more ownership to deal with its own security challenges. Let's look at quickly what I mean by saying interconnectedness and interdependencies. And again, I know you've gone through the landscape, but I would like to really insist on few issues that might have been touched on in the previous session, but I think it's important to really touch on these two key dimensions of Africa's relationship today. What characterizes today's global and Africa security landscape? Quickly, another set of four keywords: multiplicity, complexity, unpredictability, and volatility. For me, these are key important words that on a day-to-day basis are affecting the way we deal with security issues in Africa. And this also has, of course, its causes. From an African perspective, it comes from deeply rooted regional challenges, fragility factors, challenging environment. Let's just remember that fragility is a word that is not accepted by the African Union. They prefer us to use challenging environment because no country wants to be labeled as fragile. So let's continue. For the sake of keeping up with that, let's just say challenging environment. It is also rooted into what I call the contested space at regional level. You have today what we call the initial owners who are looking for regional hegemony in Africa, but also globally. Your session the day before yesterday or yesterday was talking about the newcomers in the peace and security field, Turkey, China. So you have that contested space at global level, but also at regional level where you have some countries that are looking for what we call the new hegemon, regional hegemon. In most of the sub-regional subgrouping in Africa, you'll find some of the countries that would like to take over, infusing power into their relationship with their neighbors. And that is another issue that characterizing this landscape. The last one is the blossoming of new radicalism. Religious, ethnic, political, ideological, and economic. I think this is quite important, and I will not elaborate on that because I know it has been touched on in the previous session. So how do we actually define these threats? That shows how interconnected we are with the global world. You have what I call the emerging, persistent, permanent. And these threats actually can be categorized from the three categories. They move from one to the other. Let's look at security, health security. The Ebola pandemic, for me, was a game changer. It wasn't only an African issue. It was a global issue. But we only realized that it was a global issue when when some of the countries in the Western world had to deal with it. So we are interconnected. And this is what we call emerging. A couple of years down the line, they might become permanent or they might become persistent. Let's look at energy security. Today, it is part of the emerging. It used to be persistent. It is now coming back to emerging. Migration and displacement. Haha, the new topic of the day. You could see that currently migration is what is really relating us to mainly the Western world when it comes to crisis and how do we deal with crisis. And the issue of interconnectedness comes very deeply when you talk about migration and displacement. It's emerging again. Cybersecurity. We used to think that it's only for the Western world. All of you use Yahoo emails, Gmails, but we are not safe. So be mindful about what you're exchanging by using those so-called private emails. So cybersecurity is an important issue in Africa as well. Remember, during the Panama leak, a number of African names have been on those leaks. So it is an issue for African, and that shows you how interconnected we are. Terrorism, you will see that I put it between emerging and persistent because I struggle to really put it in one of the categories. That shows you how complex dealing with terrorism is and how also it is important, it is a global issue today. Radicalization and religious extremism, the same. I put it between emerging and persistent because we are struggling to deal with it, but also these are the two issues that are connecting us today at global level. Criminal economy in Africa. Let's look at some of the most affected regions, the Sahel region, in one of them today. And this is one of the root causes of instability particularly in the Sahel region currently. But not only the Sahel region, but also the Sahara, when you look at the north of the Sahara region. Organized crime linked to the criminal economy, obvious. I'm not going to elaborate on that because the two are interconnected as well. And what I call permanent governance and democratic deficit. This is permanent. This is something we see in most African countries. And I put it under permanent, and we hope that it's going to move after being permanent to move back to being emerging 20 years ago. We hope that we'll be able to solve our democratic deficit. Climate, security, and environmental degradation is becoming permanent. We need to deal with environmental changes. And it is another root cause of conflict and instability on the African continent. So you will see that these threats can move from one category to the other, can be emerging, can be permanent, can be persistent, and vice versa. But also they are cyclical. Some of them are cyclical. So these are very important. That shows. I wanted to have this slide and to show you how difficult it is today to categorize these threats and how interconnected the world is. Let's look at quickly what characterizes, because of these threats, Africa's relationship. It's about dependency and vulnerability versus what I call self-reliance. Africa is looking more and more to take matters in its own hands. And I will just give you a couple of ideas that we are dealing with, working with the African Union. There is an increasing role of the AU and the REX today, and we have to recognize that. There has been a lot of work done by the African Union to work on peace and security challenges on the continent. You have a list of the number of peace support operations led, mounted, or sometime where Africa is participating. Mali, Somalia, Guinea, Bissau, Central African Republic, the LRA, etc., UNAMID, the hybrid mission with the United Nations. But also, more importantly, is the setting up, for the past 10 years, the Africa Peace and Security Architecture, the APSA. That is really the backbone of Africa's mechanism to deal with security challenges on the continent. So we have been doing things. We have been working in developing a doctrine. We have been working in developing mechanisms to deal with these challenges. But these challenges focuses mainly, focuses mainly on crisis management, including peace operation and the consolidation of peace. So it's the entire spectrum of peace and security that the APSA is dealing with. And let's look at quickly, in terms of dependency and self-reliance, the role of external actors, which is really the core of our topic today. How do we make sure that external actors are supporting Africa, but also we're taking what we need from those external actors? And I will go quickly because this presentation will be distributed. I just would like to point out a few things. That when we talk about self-reliance, in our defining our relationship with the rest of the world, it is important that we look at the financing issue. The bulk of Africa's security mechanism is funded by external actors. 80 to 90% of that. That's an issue that is important to deal with. Second, you have the role of new actors. China, which has pledged very recently millions of US dollars into equipment to support peace support operation in Africa, but also Turkey, the newcomer. And what I call also the silent, those you don't see. Germany, for example. The Nordic countries that we don't talk about. They are all the new actors as well. Let's look at quickly the issue of budgeting and financing that I mentioned as one of the most pressing issues to be dealt with when it comes to self-reliance and Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. And this is really very important to note, the number of funding that is coming from the rest of the world, the rest of the world. And for me, and this is my last slide, is when you look at self-reliance, I think it's important just to look at few issues and what we have been doing as Africans to deal with more self-reliance. I think it's about, it's about the future of policy in the next 20 years. It should focus more on prevention measures. It should focus more on vulnerability assessment and so on and so forth. But more importantly, I think the future of Africa's relationship is to make sure that we don't sit on the edge of the seat, but we influence the global agenda. And to influence the global agenda, someone was saying yesterday, you need to know your priority. But also you need to be able to have capacity to influence the processes that are around you. And I think that's the future of security policy. That's the future of being self-reliant vis-à-vis our partner. And I think that's what we're trying to do today. Thank you.